Oh, hi. It's been a while, hasn't it? Hey guys, it's me, Jack, and at long lasts, I am finally back with another review. I've been absent for a while for a number of reasons, including getting a new editing software, and all this crazy COVID-19 stuff. But I'm here again and ready to talk about some of the most influential monster movies of all time, the Universal horror movies. These are some of the most important movies in the horror genre ever. They paved the way for several of the horror movies that we see today. But which ones are the best, and which ones are the worst? Well, that's what I'm here to talk about. I am going to rank the 6 original Universal horror movies from worst to best. And no, I will not be including the sequels. I might talk about those some other time. With that said, sit back, relax, and enjoy my ranking of the 6 Universal monster movies. Coming in last place, we have Dracula. Now, I'd like to make it clear that I do not hate this movie, or any of the movies on this list. There is a lot that I do really like about this movie, the biggest one being, of course, Bela Lugosi as Dracula himself. While I don't think he is the best Dracula, that honor still goes to Christopher Lee. He is easily the most iconic. When most people think of Dracula, he's usually the one that comes to mind. And it's easy to see why. Just his face and eyes alone are enough to give you goosebumps. But he's also very charming and charismatic, which in a way makes him even more scary. Van Helsing is also a very fun character. The actor that plays him does a great job. Despite the fact that a lot of his dialogue is exposition, the actor delivers it in such a way that you don't care. You just hang on to his every word. And whenever he and Dracula are on screen together, it's great. The way they play off each other is wonderful. Dwight Fry is very enjoyably over the top as Renfield. He starts the movie as a very calm, easygoing, normal guy, but once Dracula corrupts his mind, he just goes balls to the wall over the top. And he's a lot of fun, if rather hokey by today's standards. But unfortunately, there is a lot of things that don't work about this movie. One of the biggest ones is that there's no music at all. Now the thing is, a bunch of these Universal horror movies don't have music. But this one honestly sticks out the most. With a lot of the other ones, they're directed in a way where there's almost always some noise, something going on to keep you engaged, even if there is no music. With this film, there are a lot of awkward moments of silence. Sometimes moments of silence in a horror movie can work, but here, most of them just fall flat. There are a lot of moments in this movie that really could have used some music to make them more scary. Another reason why I feel like this is easily the weakest Universal monster movie is that we don't really feel anything for the monster in this film. With pretty much all the other movies, you feel sympathy for the monster. Here, Dracula is basically just evil and has to be destroyed. Now, that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes a simple story about a monster that has to be destroyed can be good. Some of the greatest monster movies of all time were like that. But it definitely would have worked if the film was, well, more exciting. And due to its lack of music and rather awkward direction, it really isn't. All of it builds up to a very disappointing climax, easily the worst out of any of the monster movies on this list. Dracula goes to sleep in his coffin, and Van Helsing just kills him while he's sleeping. No final confrontation, nothing. We don't even get a shot of his dead body. Van Helsing just says Dracula is dead forever. Okay, I guess we'll just take your word for it. In my opinion, the Hammer film Horror of Dracula is far superior. Even Nosferatu, the silent film that was made before this, I felt had much more atmosphere, and was much more effective than this. As it stands, it's not awful, but it's easily the weakest of the Universal monster movies. Coming in 5th place, we have The Wolfman. This was actually the first Universal monster movie that I ever saw. And as an introduction to these movies, this one was pretty decent, albeit flawed as well. Lon Chaney delivers a very solid performance as Larry Talbot, the Wolfman. He plays him as a very charming and likable man who you really feel sorry for when he gets bitten. Claude Rains is equally good as his father, and the chemistry between them is very solid. All of it leads up to a very emotional climax where his father is forced to kill what he doesn't know at the time is his son, who has turned into a wolf. The makeup for the Wolfman is very impressive, and the Wolfman design itself has really made its mark in pop culture. Unfortunately, we don't really see him as the Wolfman that much in this movie. He's only the Wolfman for 3 scenes. I counted 3 scenes in this movie. Now, that isn't always a problem with monster movies. For example, we don't really see the shark much in Jaws. But I feel like where that movie succeeded and this one didn't was that Jaws built up to the reveal of the shark. For the first half of the movie, we see people attacked by something that we don't see. And it isn't until halfway through the movie that we actually see what it is. This film maybe could have done something similar. I know that these monster movies are usually not very long, but I do feel like they should have had him turn into the Wolfman a little bit earlier. Having him attack people and you not actually seeing him fully until later on. That, I think, would have been a better way to do it, instead of him just appearing 3 times and all in the same location. Still, at the end of the day, the film is enjoyable. Coming in 4th place, we have The Mummy. For the longest time, this was my least favorite of these movies. I think it just boiled down to the fact that the character of the mummy never really interested me as much as the other monsters. But rewatching it recently, I was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed it. The character of the mummy himself is very compelling. A man who was sentenced to death because he attempted to resurrect his love from the grave. The scene where he tells his backstory is actually very beautifully told and rather emotional. Boris Karloff naturally brings a lot of charisma and presence to the role. And the love story between him and his long-lost love is actually rather touching, while at the same time very creepy, as he plans to mummify her as well. There are some things, however, that do hold this film back. The biggest one being some really bad music editing. There are times in this film where the music just cuts off abruptly. On the one hand, I'm happy that there actually is music, unlike in Dracula. But on the other hand, they should be able to edit it in a more natural and coherent way, instead of just having it cut off suddenly. I mean, I know I've had that happen in some of my videos, but I'm an amateur movie reviewer on YouTube. These are professionals working in Hollywood. Granted, this was the early 30s, so maybe they were still figuring it out then, but I don't know, it still feels very poorly done. And the ending is incredibly abrupt. Granted, that is kind of a thing with all these monster movies. Once the monster is dead, the movie just sort of ends. But here it's especially jarring, because the shot pans down towards his skeleton, and right as we get to the skeleton, it fades out, not really allowing us to look at it for that long. But at the end of the day, this is still a very solid movie. It's dramatic, it's emotional, it's everything that you'd want from a classic monster movie. Coming in 3rd place is the movie that many consider to be the absolute best Universal monster movie, Frankenstein. And yeah, I can definitely see why. This is just a classic story. A mad scientist brings a man back to life in an attempt to push the boundaries of science. But things backfire when the man comes back to life and starts attacking people. And so it's up to the doctor to destroy what he has created. People were already familiar with the story of Frankenstein before this movie, but this is what turned the name Frankenstein into a household name. Of course, as many of us have pointed out, Frankenstein is actually the doctor. The monster is just the monster. In a way, however, it is appropriate that this film is called Frankenstein, because all of these films are named after the monster. And in a lot of ways, Dr. Frankenstein is the true monster. He is the one that starts all of this. However, he still isn't pure evil, and that's what I like. He's over the top, he's eccentric, he's ambitious, he's a little arrogant, but he's all doing this for what he feels is a good cause. It just unfortunately backfires. Ultimately, the real villain of this movie is Fritz, his assistant. When the monster first comes to life, it doesn't really know what to think. It's like a baby who's just been born. But then Fritz starts being a dick to it, and it starts getting the vibe that people are cruel. So yeah, when it all comes down to it, Fritz is really the villain of this movie. The monster himself is probably the most sympathetic and tragic out of all the Universal monsters, at least for me. He genuinely just doesn't know how to act. Probably my favorite scene in the movie is the scene between him and the little girl. She shows him her flowers, which can float in the water. He then starts wondering if she could float as well. He picks her up and throws her in, but she ends up drowning. And in easily Boris Karloff's best bit of acting, the monster realizes that he's made a mistake, and is very horrified. The set pieces in this film are also quite amazing. The absolute highlight being the laboratory, where the monster is brought to life. And all of it builds up to a spectacular climax, and we get the final showdown between the creator and his creation. We also get easily my favorite two shots in the film, of Frankenstein and the monster looking at each other through a spinning gear. The windmill burns down around the monster, and he screams in terror. It's really quite heart-wrenching. The only real problem I have with this movie is the forced, tacked-on happy ending. This just isn't a story that should have that kind of ending. We have Baron Frankenstein toasting to a son to the House of Frankenstein, and the film just ends. It really doesn't seem appropriate, given everything that just went down. Outside of that, though, this film is a true classic, and is definitely a must-watch if you haven't seen it. Coming in second place, we have Creature from the Black Lagoon. These last two films on this list I hold in pretty much equal regard, and it was very hard to decide which one would take the top spot and which one would take the second spot. But as of right now, Creature from the Black Lagoon sits at number 2. I have always loved this movie. Creature from the Black Lagoon was easily the universal monster that I knew the least about. I already knew quite a lot about Frankenstein, the Wolfman, Dracula, and so on, but I didn't really know much about the creature. So I didn't really know what to expect going into this movie. But when it was over, I was very impressed. This was the last of the classic Universal monster movies to be made. At least the original movies. And in a way, this movie feels like the perfect result after years of making these movies. The filmmaking and the cinematography are at their absolute best. A problem that I have with some of the earlier Universal monster movies is that at times they can be a little bit too dark. I get that they're going for some scary lighting, but sometimes it just feels like overkill. But this movie, the lighting and cinematography is perfect. It's not too dark, it's not too bright. It perfectly takes you into the atmosphere of the scene and the moment. Especially the scenes underwater. It's amazing how a movie like this, where a lot of the scenes don't have any dialogue and are underwater, can still keep me engaged. Part of that is due to the beautiful underwater cinematography. The Black Lagoon itself truly looks like a scary and nasty place to be in, yet also beautiful at the same time. But what really helps it is the musical score. This film has without a doubt the best music out of any of the films on this list. The theme for the creature itself is instantly recognizable and iconic. And whenever the characters are underwater, the music is almost always playing, taking you through the story visually. The music itself tells a story, and it adds a wonderful sense of emotion to the film as well. Particularly in easily my favorite scene, when the creature swims underneath the girl. The music helps us feel the emotion of the moment. The creature has never seen a human before. He doesn't know what to think. Should he be amazed? Should he be terrified? Either way, he's curious, and at the same time, scared. Ultimately, he's just as scared of them as they are of him. And the music, combined with the performances, shows this beautifully. This film is very similar in a lot of ways to Jaws. They're both monster movies, they're both made by Universal, they both have a monster that comes from the water, they both feature a scene of the monster watching a girl swimming above it, and they both have excellent scores that add to the horror and the suspense of the experience. Take away the music from both of these films, and while they're still good, they aren't nearly as effective. Taking that out of the equation, though, this film actually has some pretty solid characters, particularly David and Mark. David is a very good-natured scientist who's interested in studying the creature. Meanwhile, Mark is more interested in the money, and if he can't have the creature alive, then he'll have him dead. He's ultimately the pseudo-villain of this movie. But at the same time, he isn't pure evil. You do understand where he's coming from. As he explains at the beginning of the movie, they need money to run their institute, and bringing back this creature will most definitely get them that. I appreciate them not just making him a mustache-twirling evil villain completely. Even some of the side characters I enjoy, particularly the captain of the boat, who has some genuinely entertaining lines, and one very badass moment where he puts Mark in his place. Of course, it's the creature himself who is the star of the show, played by two different people, Rico Browning in the water and Ben Chapman on the land, and both of them do a great job. Even though you can technically tell it's a man in a suit, it still is honestly very convincing. The way that he breathes in and out when he's on the land, and the way his body moves. You really do feel like this is an actual creature that's out of water. They build him up brilliantly. This is what they should have done with the Wolfman. Right at the start of the movie, we see his hand come out of the water, accompanied of course by that great music cue. Then later we see a POV shot as he attacks some men at camp. This instantly builds our interests. We have to know what this thing looks like. And then we get easily one of the best monster reveals of all time. When David and Mark are in the water, and then suddenly the creature comes right up out of the darkness. There's no big build-up, it's sudden, fast, almost anticlimactic, yet effective. It's the simpleness of the reveal that ultimately makes it work. That, and again, that fucking brilliant music. The creature doesn't really know what to think of these humans. But once they start poisoning his environment and killing the fish, naturally, he feels threatened. And that's what's so great about these monster movies. The monster at times seems almost more relatable than the humans. Imagine you were in your home and you were just enjoying yourself, and then suddenly some strangers come in and start killing the animals that you share your home with. And there's just such a sense of loneliness to this guy, which is particularly shown at the end of the film as he sinks down into the darkness alone, in a truly chilling and at the same time heartbreaking final shot. About the only real problem I have with this movie is that, once again, the ending is very abrupt. We don't even see the humans leave the lagoon. So I guess we just have to assume that they made it home alive. But honestly, that's my only problem. This is an excellent monster movie, and very underrated. I also really loved the movie The Shape of Water, which won Best Picture for the year 2017. It's pretty much a remake of this movie, but taking a bit of a different angle to it. But now we come to it. My number one favorite Universal monster movie, The Invisible Man. This movie was quite revolutionary, particularly with its special effects. The special effects made to make Claude Rains look invisible are still very, very impressive. I genuinely do believe that this guy is invisible. Of course, special effects are one thing, but the thing that really makes this film awesome is Claude Rains himself. I mean, holy hell. This is a performance that is so good, I honestly feel like he should have gotten an Oscar nomination at least. Especially considering that you don't see him throughout most of the movie until the very, very end. So he has to let you know what he's feeling simply through his voice alone, and at times facial movements, when he's wearing bandages on his head. But it really works. When he's angry, you feel the anger that he's giving off. When he's emotional, you feel the emotion. His performance is genuinely quite terrifying. He can be extremely loud and over the top, but he can also be very calm and collected. And it's moments like that that are honestly the most scary for me. One of my favorites is the scene where he visits his old partner, Kemp, and very casually tells him that he is going to be his partner, and he's going to help him wreak havoc and kill people, simply for the fun of it. Just the way he casually says this, like it's just some everyday errand, is quite bone-chilling. And several of the lines that he says are truly brilliant. The whole world is my hiding place. I shall kill you even if you hide in the deepest cave of the earth. The writing for this character is just as strong as the performance. Granted, he is very much just a madman, but he's just so enjoyable. In a lot of ways, he's kind of a precursor to the Joker. In fact, Mark Hamill openly admitted that he got a lot of his inspiration for his version of the Joker from this movie. From his voice, to his motivations, to even his laugh. By God, that laugh of his is amazing. The very idea of this movie as well is just really unsettling. A man who is invisible. He could be anywhere. He could be right next to you right now, ready to attack. That alone makes this film quite unsettling. Even though this movie doesn't have any music, it's never really boring, at least not in my opinion. And part of that is because of the way that James Whale directed it. James Whale, who also directed Frankenstein, directed this film in a way that always kept me engaged. Where in something like Dracula, there are moments that are just genuinely so silent that you can hear a pin drop, and it's just not interesting in the slightest. In this film, there's almost always some sort of noise. The emotional center of this movie is also very powerful. Jack Griffin, the Invisible Man himself, is clearly not a well man. The experiments that he did while turning him invisible also drove him insane. However, his old girlfriend still believes that there is some good in him, and she tries to help him. She is the one thing that seems to anchor him, but despite that, he's just too addicted to this drug and the power that it gives him. He enjoys tormenting others, doing things that range from simple pranks to mass murder, including crashing a train, in a really impressive scene. And this just adds even more to the scariness of this movie. The man is just so unpredictable. You have no idea what he's going to do next, whether it be a harmless joke or brutal murder. The film really keeps you engaged and on the edge of your seat from beginning to end. You want them to catch this guy. You want them to bring him to justice. And ultimately they do. He's shot. And we do get a very nice and emotional death scene. Again, while he still was a madman, we know that at one point in his life he was just a normal person. While I would have liked to have seen what he was like before he became invisible and went crazy, at the same time, I do like the mystery of it all. Plus, I do like that we don't actually see his face until the very end, when he dies. In the end, The Invisible Man is a true horror masterpiece, and in my opinion, the best out of the classic Universal monster movies.